And yeah, I'll give you a little bit more of a tour. So most of you have found the chat area now. Feel free to have a bit of conversation in there. I think there's a few people saying hi to each other because they know each other, which is cute. The other key bit for this is the Q&A area. So as we're having a chat, please drop your questions into the Q&A. I've got a few questions for the panel, but this is way more exciting and interesting if you ask questions, because there's only so many things I can think of. So please do pop your questions in there. We'll get through as many of them as we can, and that will help us to have a really cool panel today. We can't see or hear you because we're in Zoom webinar, so don't have to worry about trying to find the mute button. It's not a problem. The way that you contribute is through the chat and through the Q&A. So yeah, let's get started. So I'm joined by Ellie and Russell and Annie. They all have, as I said, really interesting, quite different careers. We've called this panel Careers in Social Action because I think that all of the roles that they do make a difference to kind of the greater good. And I think over the course of the festival, we've had lots of chat about what it's like to work in journalism, what it's like to work in students' unions. But I thought it'd be really important to look at different career options that are about doing something where you care about the cause and you get to kind of bring that into your day job. So what I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do first is just to say hi and tell us about what their role is and who they work for. And then we'll ask them a little bit more later on about like how they got there, and or you can tell us now actually. So who are you, what's your job, and how did you get there, what did you do in between now and then? And I'll go first over to Annie.
Hi everyone, my name's Annie and I work for an international animal protection organisation called the Humane League. Whilst we're an international charity, I am actually based in the UK and live in Sheffield. And all of our team work remotely, so we have people in Brighton, in Newcastle, in Liverpool, everywhere, which is really great. And it's kind of, at the moment with the current situation, obviously like that's been really helpful. And my role is the European Corporate Relations Co-ordinator. So I'll probably explain a bit more afterwards about what that means. But basically, as somebody who is very passionate about animal rights and animal welfare, it was kind of a dream job for me to get into this. And I studied French before, which was quite a kind of open subject. There's no kind of defined career path, I think, if you do languages. And I guess I enjoyed traveling, which then kind of led me on to working in various places. I became vegan about 7 years ago and got a job in a vegetarian and vegan hotel, where I kind of learned a lot of administrative skills, and then was lucky enough to get a job with the Vegan Society, and then eventually with the Humane League. So that's a very brief overview of what I do.
Thank you. We'll hear a bit more about the day job in a minute. What about you, Ellie? What do you do?
Hi everyone. My name's Ellie. I'm also living in Sheffield, not too far from Annie. And I am the youth participation coordinator at a charity called Chilypep, which stands for the Children and Young People's Empowerment Project. So we're based in Sheffield, but we work across South Yorkshire, mainly Sheffield and Barnsley, but a little bit of work in Doncaster. And our sort of main aim is to support young people to make change, and that's sort of quite broadly either change to their own lives, change to their communities, or change on a local or national strategic level. So how did I get into the role? So my degree is in history, and then after my degree I did the Department for International Development grad scheme. So I was living in Glasgow for a while and then down in London. And as I was doing that grad scheme, I worked on a movement called Youth for Change, which was around mobilising young people across the UK, but also across the globe, against child marriage and female genital mutilation. So this was really the first time I'd worked with young people in a professional sense. I used to be a football coach, so I'd worked with young people, like teaching them how to play football. But yeah, as a worker, and I absolutely loved it. So my contract ended with them. I realised I did not want to be a civil servant for various reasons. So I moved back to Sheffield and I went back to work in the coffee shop that I'd worked at as a student. And as I was doing that, I started volunteering at Chilypep. And then a position came up, which was maternity cover. And 5 years later, I'm still there. She's not still on maternity leave. I just got a different job.
Thank you, Ellie. And finally, Russell, tell us about your job.
Hi everyone. Yes, my name's Russell and I'm the Senior Campaigns Officer for the Green Party of England and Wales. So that means I'm the member of staff that looks after all of our issues-based campaigning as opposed to our election campaigns. So some things I've focused on in the last couple of years have been all the stuff we've done around getting councils to declare climate emergencies and a lot of the stuff around the People's Vote campaign, that sort of stuff. But I also do a lot of broader comms work as well for the organisation. So I studied English at the University of Leeds, and then after that I undertook an internship with a food waste charity called Food Cycle for a few months doing comms for them, and from there I had an entry-level comms job for sustainability team at the National Union of Students, which is where I stayed for about 5 years, and ended up running the comms for a department of about 25 people, which was a range of environmental projects and campaigns and stuff like that. And as I say, did that for about 5 years before moving to the Green Party. That's how I ended up where I am.
Clearly, to get a career in social action, you have to go to university in Yorkshire. That's it. Job done. Right, end of session.
Yeah.
I think there's more than that. So sorry to everybody who is not from Yorkshire. There's people I can see in the chat from Bath Spa and Swansea. I went to uni in Swansea. Hi, Katie. So tell us a little bit more. Like, you've told us about your actual role and what that, like, on the bigger picture, what that involves, but tell us a little bit more about the day job, because that's where I think people can get a bit more of an understanding of what it's actually like to do your job. So just to give us an example of a couple of things that have happened this week, what's been going on, and we'll go over to you first, Russell, this time. What's been happening today, for example?
Well, every day my workday starts at 6. And I spend some time going over the day's newspapers and sector press, and also look at the media output of other political parties. And I do a briefing for all our politicians and party officers and stuff like that, which I try and circulate as early in the morning as I can. So that sort of gives people a steer on lines and party positions for engaging with the media if they're asked about any of the issues of the day, or some steer on how to respond to things on social media if we have a central party line on things, and also just keeping people informed about what's going on. Then about 9:30 I have a team meeting with the rest of the communications team. So although I'm the campaigns officer, I'm the only campaigns officer at the moment, and it sits within the communications team. So we have a meeting at 9:30 and we discuss what we want to respond to that day and how we want to do it, and divvy up tasks and priorities for the day, and also just check in with each other on ongoing priorities and workload, and just checking we're all okay generally before we set about the bulk of the day. And then from there, my day always looks very different. Usually, my responsibilities centre in some form or another around writing or copywriting. But that can look very, very differently every day. So something I've been working on recently was, over the last couple of weeks, was a policy paper called Whatever It Takes, which I was working with consulting with about a dozen NGOs and a lot of politicians internally to come up with a policy platform that would, we hope, make sure that absolutely nobody was left behind in this crisis, and making sure that everybody had enough to live on, enough didn't become homeless, and weren't put in any obvious manifestations of physical danger. So that's been taking up quite a lot of my time recently, and that's been published this week, which was quite exciting for me. I really enjoyed that. Some other things I've been today, you asked about today, so specifically today I've actually been working on a small piece for Channel 4. We get a piece on Channel 4 about once a year. They give it to every political party, and I've been sort of trying to line up interview subjects for our piece, which we're going to be doing on a green recovery from COVID-19.
Oh wow!
Yeah, hopefully it's coming together a little. I'm a little behind, truth be told, but it should be on TV in mid-August. But if I pull it all together, that's what I've been working on today. But it's always really varied, really fast paced, really quite fluid, a lot of fluidity between the roles. It's quite a small team, quite a small organisation. So there's like not too much rigidity about what my job is or anyone's job is. It's just kind of like what needs to happen today and who's best placed to make that happen in terms of capacity, expertise, and that sort of thing. So that's something I really like about the role, is that it's really fluid and dynamic, pretty fast.
I guess you have to be pretty flexible and just get on with it, and can't be like, well, that's not part of my routine today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially from the morning call afterwards. It could really, anything can happen. Really, could be sent. Obviously, under the current circumstances, it's very different to working remotely from home. But you could really just be packed off at the office to go and join someone at a protest somewhere, or go to a set piece speech somewhere, or a panel discussion, support a politician wherever they need to be. It's really exciting.
Cool. Sorry, I just had to mute there because there was a plane going over. So sorry if anybody heard that.
Sorry, my door slammed in the middle of that, but just everyone's okay. Don't worry.
I think everybody's used to this kind of weird world where, like you said, like your son might cry during this, like my cat might attack me during this, like anything can happen. This is the joys of working.
Yeah, he's currently out of the flat, but you'll know about it when he comes back.
Ellie, can you tell us a little bit more about like the day-to-day for you? Like, what have you been up to today? What have you been doing this week?
So much like Russell, my day-to-day is really varied. So it's hard to say like what a day looks like. I guess because we take a youth work approach to everything that we're doing, which means we start where the young person's at. And when you're working with 50 plus young people, they're all at different places. So day-to-day can be crazy. But it can range from doing sort of one-to-one support and advocacy, and the advocacy is usually in mental health or social care settings, sometimes education. We do a lot of group work, so at the moment that's been all on Zoom, and I run 2 projects. So one's called the Rubik Project, which is around community cohesion, and then another one which is fairly new, which is called Gen Z, A Generation for Change, and that's purely a social action project. So that's training young people as campaigners and helping them to run campaigns on whatever they want, which is great. At the moment, so today we've been creating a social action toolkit, so how to campaign online. So last month all the young people in the group were like, things have changed, we can't get out and protest in the same way that we would. What can we do to support other young people across the UK? And then it kind of spiraled from there, because they were thinking, well, even outside of COVID, there's lots of young people for very many reasons that can't go out and campaign. So that could be certain disabilities, mental health illnesses, if you're living in rural or remote places, if you're a young carer. So they were like, right, let's make this toolkit. So I've been trying to type up loads of their ideas and get that finalised. Go to a lot of strategic meetings. That word strategic is such a like professional thing that you never use in real life, but so an example of that would be I sit on Sheffield's domestic abuse service provider group, and that's to make sure that young women's voices are heard in service design and delivery. And then we deliver a lot of training which is co-produced and co-delivered alongside young people. That can be on things like youth participation, or it can be more topical, like we work with a group of unaccompanied asylum seeker and refugee young people, and we delivered some training to social work students around how best to support young refugees when they come to the UK. So yeah, really varied. And I also, not unfortunately at the moment working from home, but I also get to go to Laser Quest and places like that quite a lot, so pretty good.
Yeah, sounds fun. And another really varied day. Annie, what about you? What have you been up to this week? Less travel, I expect.
Yeah, it's again another very varied role, and I think so I've been on furlough for the last 2.5 months and just come back this week. So my week this week has been very much just catching up with hundreds and hundreds of emails, but a sort of usual day to day of what I would do before furlough would be, so we are a campaigning organisation, and we campaign against some of the largest food companies globally, and also I specifically work across Europe. So usually, like I said, there'd be a lot of travelling, which is not happening at the moment. But before we kind of get to that travel stage, we have to do a lot of research into companies. We look at any existing animal welfare policies which they might have, and just their sort of general corporate social responsibility pages, see if there's anything that we can leverage and discuss within meetings with companies. Because ultimately what we want them to do is to adopt more robust chicken welfare policies specifically. So the Humane League works, we focus on chickens raised for meat and also egg laying hens, and we've secured hundreds of policies over the years for companies going cage free, which is really great. So what I would do within that is kind of email and phone companies, try and arrange a meeting with them, take a presentation to go and discuss why it is that we're actually looking to improve welfare standards for chickens at the moment. Generally companies it depends on the company, but often they can be very interested or quite defensive and not want to talk to us. So there's quite a lot of negotiating that happens. We are also part of a coalition of animal protection groups across the world called the Open Wing Alliance. The Humane League UK and the Humane League founded the Open Wing Alliance a couple of years ago, and it's really great. It's brought together, I think there's something like 86 organisations across the world who are all working on the same topic. So as part of my job, I often coordinate meetings with other animal protection groups. We strategise on our next campaigns that are coming up. Just make sure that our work is aligned and that we're all kind of asking for the same thing, so that it drives more movement and more change within the corporate world. And also as a team, we're also quite a small team, so we have quite a lot of meetings. Like today, had a meeting with my team about looking at our next sort of project and the next sector that we'll be looking at potentially campaigning against. So it's all very exciting. It's all kind of it's very interchangeable. Like it can change very quickly, obviously, with the situation as it is now, with a lot of restaurants sadly closing. It's kind of shifted our focus away from the restaurant sector towards other food sectors. So yeah, it's very varied and very busy at the moment.
Yeah, I bet. And like all of this like unknown, I'm sure for all three of you, all of the unknown that's happening with COVID and everything is causing like uncertainty in your day job too. I know it is for lots of SUs, and there's a couple of people in the chat that have like got solidarity on being furloughed and how strange it is to come back. We've had a couple of questions that I'll take from the attendees. So Izzy from Heriot Watt Students' Unions asked, what do you think are the key skills for each of your roles, and how did you get experience for them? So what are those things that have really helped you to get the role that you do now? And I'll go to Annie, because she's on my screen at the moment.
Great question. I think probably the main one for my role is to be relentless. As I said before, a lot of companies are very easily, like, they don't want to talk to you. Basically, animal welfare is not on their priority. It's not something that they want to think about. So for me, it's definitely kind of just knowing that what you're doing is a marathon and not a sprint, and just giving everything that you can. So yeah, being relentless. Another key skill is to be nimble, right? We've talked about the changing climate at the moment, the way things are just rapidly shifting. I think showing that you can adapt your work to new situations, being creative, thinking outside the box, particularly with campaigns, is also really important. Mm-hmm. And collaboration, I think, is a really key part of this kind of work that I think probably Ellie and Russell would agree with. I think working with other organisations who are also wanting, to achieve similar things is really important. So I think those are kind of skills that particularly animal protection charities would look out for, and probably for other social justice charities as well.
How do you develop relentlessness? And this is open to Ellie and Russell too. How do you, or it might not be develop relentlessness, but how do you protect yourself from that? Because I'm sure with all of you, there's times where things are emotional, hard. Working in a career where I know that all three of you really care about the cause that you work with. and what I'm sure that's like sometimes breeds more emotion than in like other sectors where perhaps you're a little bit detached from the issues. What do you do to like protect yourself and mean that you can keep going and you can be relentless?
I think for me, it's about setting very clear boundaries. So that's obviously protecting myself, but also that helps young people as well. So they all know that at between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. my work phone goes off, so they won't be able to get hold of me till the next day. And likewise with weekends, unless I'm working a weekend, because we've done a lot of work, and I am really lucky with my work. We have clinical supervision as well, so we have access to a counsellor if we need it, because you do hear a lot of very traumatic stories from young people who have been through very difficult things, and that sort of secondhand trauma is very real sometimes. So yeah, it's that having boundaries, being able to switch off and finding what your self-care looks like, because it is different for everyone. So for me, it's just going out and walking my dog. So like make sure she gets lots of walks if I'm having a stressful week. But yeah, it's finding what works for you, but having those clear boundaries and saying, no, I'm switching off now. Otherwise work would literally take over your life. Yeah,
good point. Before you mute, oh, you've already muted. You have to tell everybody what your dog's called, Ellie.
Oh, my dog's called Jane. Jane the Greyhound.
Jane Grey on Instagram.
Yeah, follow her.
She's very cute. Annie Russell, anything else on this like I can't say it. You know what I mean?
I do. I'm not sure anyone's ever described me as relentless. So I'm not sure I'm best placed to offer my expertise on this. But I think something I get what's being got at, and I think for me, if you're feeling that sort of fatigue, lining up something that is achievable in the short term that you can feel proud of is something that I fall back on quite a lot, even if that's something very, very small, but just something that you can just point at and say like, oh, I did that this week. That certainly helps me a lot and keeps me in the game, so to speak, while some of the longer term stuff feels really distant or impossible, or that you've been knocked back so many times on something really big. Just lining up a few small wins for yourself is always a good strategy for me anyway.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Anything else from you, Annie?
I think, yeah, both really good points. Something that helps me is my team. I think we're all because we're all kind of, we work very closely together. We're quite a close group, and we have like a Slack channel which is called Just for Fun, where we just post like silly animal videos and just stuff to kind of keep up team morale, because there can be times when it is kind of, it's quite stressful, and like you feel like you're fighting a fight that's not going anywhere sometimes. So you need to kind of keep each other going and look out for each other.
On that, like, I know, Annie, you sometimes have to go into those like big boardrooms with people who really don't want to hear from you. What do you do like 5 minutes before you go in?
I think for me, it's kind of, I become a different person. Like I studied French at uni, but I was also quite interested in drama and acting. So I kind of become a different person when I'm in the boardroom, and you know that you're there for a reason. And if you get a meeting as well, it's also very lucky, so you don't want to mess it up.
That's a big win.
Yeah. So it's just kind of about getting in the zone, getting focused, and just remembering why you're there.
I suppose that like being a different person is a bit of like a protection veil as well, in case like they're a bit rude or a bit difficult. Yeah. We kind of went off on a really interesting tangent there, but is there anything else from you, Russell or Ellie, around like those like key skills that are needed to do the sort of work that you do?
I think just something I would have added on that is from the campaigning aspect of my roles, I don't know if the others would agree, is it sounds really obvious, but to get involved in an actual grassroots campaign, because that teaches you a lot more about campaigning than any desk job with the word campaign in the job role ever would. And that's something that I really attribute to giving me the skills that I needed to do the job I do now. You learn so much more on the ground about how you organise and how you work out, have an analysis of power and what's winnable and how to actually achieve change. You just can't do if you're like a campaigns officer or an NGO or something like that, in my opinion anyway. So I would always recommend that people get involved in a grassroots campaign of some some kind if they want to get into a professionalized campaign role as well.
Mm-hmm. Any?
Yeah, like I completely agree with everything that's been said already. The one that I'd add, which is kind of specific to working with young people, but I guess it can translate across all kind of social action, and that's to be authentic and to be honest, because young people in particular can see through bullshit. So if you go in and you try and be really down with the kids and stuff, they're just going to be like, what the hell are you doing? But if you sort of just be yourself and be honest, be authentic, and young people will sort of appreciate that. And even if they take the piss out of you and say you're not cool enough to wear those trainers, Ellie. That's actually been said quite recently.
Oh, I'm sure you were cool enough to wear those trainers. Actually, they just didn't get it. And a question we've had that's come in that I think is really interesting, I'm not sure what you all think about it, is Alice has asked, do you find anybody belittles your occupation? And if so, how do you deal with it? I'm just looking. Oh yeah, here's Annie.
Yeah. I think what I often find is that people, when you say you work in animal protection, they'll sort of go, oh, I love dogs and cats. And actually, like what we do is we focus more on farmed animals, so animals raised for food. So it's not really belittling. I think it's just more of like a misunderstanding, which is quite interesting as well, particularly if somebody's vegan or not vegan. It's kind of, but it does open some really interesting discussions, and then from there you can kind of explain a bit more about what you do, and then they understand it a little bit more. So but yeah, no one's ever really said anything really horrible.
That's good.
Yeah.
Do Ellie and Russell, do you ever have anybody like really misunderstand your work and think you do something completely different? I know in student unions a lot of the time people are like, oh great, you're still a student, that's nice for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand what a youth worker is. I think that's like since sort of can't even say it now, universal youth provision has been like decimated. No one really knows what youth workers do, and I know there's a lot of assumption that we just like run a youth club and play pool with teenagers, and whilst there is like an element of that, people, when I explain what I do, are sometimes really shocked. They're like, oh, you go to Parliament and stuff with young people. Like, yeah, that's part of it. But yeah, so I think there is a misunderstanding, but I don't think people are generally belittling unless they are behind my back and I've not heard them.
Yeah, I think that's how I'd characterize it as well, as sometimes a misunderstanding of my role. I mean, as I've sort of alluded to, the precise definition and boundaries of my role are quite, sometimes I don't even know that actually, so I can't expect other people to always understand that as well. And I think that often when you work for like something like the Green Party or any sort of environmental organisation, people seem to blur them all into one and think like, oh yeah, I remember when you did like block that road, and oh no, that's Extinction Rebellion, or like drop that banner, oh that's Greenpeace, and people think that you're all the same organisation, but I can't think of it. Sorry?
You do green stuff, don't you?
Exactly, yeah. I can't think of an example of being actually belittled, maybe by my older brother, but I can handle that.
We've had a couple more questions, so I'm going to answer India's question first, and then we'll go to Katie's question, and I've got another one about like more about tips for people who want to do what you do, but India's question is a little bit different first. So India's asked, what strategy changes have your charities or organisations had to implement to tackle COVID-19? So what's had to change strategically for your organisations because of the pandemic?
Mine was really strange at first because obviously all of our work is reliant on face-to-face work, whether that be one-to-one or group. So we moved that online very quickly. We've also had emergency funding from Paul Hamlin Foundation and the Big Lottery to support young people to get online, because we work with some of the most vulnerable young people in Sheffield who might not have Wi-Fi at home or smartphones or laptops. So we've been able to buy some tablets and some smartphones and pay for dongles and things for young people. So yeah, we're now just doing all of our weekly groups via Zoom. One-to-ones are now either via Zoom or on phone calls. Obviously that required lots of new risk assessments and things, so that took up a lot of time. having a lot more meetings with the team. So like Annie said, it's so important to like stay linked up with your team when you're working from home, because otherwise it can be really isolating. And then sort of the big strategic thing that we've been doing for the last 3 months is making sure that young people are central to conversations around COVID planning, particularly around education, because there's so much going on. No one really knows what's going on, and young people's voices just aren't being heard. So we're doing a big consultation and big reports to, well, more locally for us, Sheffield City Council, making sure that young people's voices are central to those conversations.
Thanks. Loads of change. I mean, it's changes everywhere, isn't it? But it sounds like it's all kind of become quite positive and going okay now. And I was going to ask about risk assessment, because it's one of the things you think, we're going online. Oh, great. We've not got people in a room. Don't have to worry about fire anymore. But there's other things. Annie, what about you? What's the Humane League been doing? Has there been any big strategic changes?
Yeah, there has actually. I mean, initially 70% of us were furloughed, so that was kind of like the first big change that happened to the team. But now we're all back. It's basically kind of like reassessing our campaigns, looking at where we can begin to campaign again, because we put a lot of things on pause with the situation being quite sensitive. We thought it's probably not the right time to be launching campaigns. So yeah, like I said before, like kind of looking at the restaurant sector, for example, which is really struggling. We were sort of planning on a few campaigns around there, but now things have changed, and looking at different sectors. One thing that we are going to be doing more of this year is something called enforcement, where a lot of companies have got cage-free commitments that they might have made in like 2015 or 2016 that are now coming into effect this year. So we're reaching out to companies, making sure that their fulfillments have been met, so that they will be completely cage-free, and also trying to encourage them to kind of talk about it a bit more to get more coverage on that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm kind of still catching up with a few things, so probably missed quite a lot of what we're doing.
But yeah, just a couple of days.
yeah. So yeah, just readjusting to the situation, and also kind of keeping up with industry news. That's something I do quite a lot of my day. The supply chain has been completely disrupted, so just seeing where things are coming from, which countries, and yeah.
Wow. Gosh, I'm really glad I don't have to navigate all of this like you three do. Russell, I think we've probably seen a little bit more in the news about the types of changes that have been affecting political parties, but how have things changed strategically for like your role in the Green Party?
Well, I think it wasn't lockdown that kicked in just before our party conference, but it was when large gatherings were starting to be cancelled. So that was the first sort of taste of just like, where this year is going to be very different. We had to cancel our policy making forum of the spring. And then obviously all elections got cancelled as well. So that was going to be our huge strategic priority. So we had local elections coming up when would it have been, about a month ago, or 2 months ago rather. And London Assembly elections and mayoral elections all around the country. So we had all that sort of in the pipeline, and that's just sort of gone for at least a year. So that was a really big shock and change. I think one of the key things we've been trying to think about is how to keep engaging our membership when we can't actually do things together physically. So there's been a lot of online events going on to bring membership together and keep them active and informed and engaged, and try and keep that aspect of things ticking over. I think because of that huge drop off in what was going to be a huge strategic priority, there's been some capacity in senior management to actually think a little bit more long term, which is quite nice. But in the comms team, of course, because it's just such a crisis situation of in every aspect of political life, obviously we've had to think quite creatively. I think it feels that there's been like a real shift in how politics is covered as well, because of the nature of the crisis, which we've had to think quite creatively about as a comms team, because that sort of structure of like government does something, opposition responds to it, and then like smaller parties try and chip in as like the third voice. That's kind of gone. Like it's the government does something, and then there's like a scientific consensus that's like, so, you know, it's experts and scientists have sort of taken the response slot. And so like even my impression of it is that even Labour are sometimes struggling to break into the news cycle. So that's been quite a challenge, and that's made us think really differently about how we do comms at this moment and how we make useful and relevant political interventions into this situation, with varying degrees of success, would be the honest answer.
Tactics have been working quite well.
Sometimes it's frustrating, because obviously by definition you don't see what hasn't worked because it hasn't cut through. But there's plenty of that, as well as what has landed. So sometimes it does, to go back to that relentlessness thing, it does feel sometimes that like, wow, we're just working harder and harder here and we're not cutting through with anything. But I think overall, on reflection, we're quite pleased with how we've managed to adapt to the situation.
Good. So just to sort of finish, there's been a question about this and I wanted to ask about it too, is if people wanted to do a job like yours, where do you look for jobs like yours? Where are they advertised? And in the comments, India has said charityjobs.co.uk, which is one that I think we'd all recommend. Where else do you look for this sort of thing? And do you have any top tips for somebody that wanted to do a job like yours? We'll go to Ellie first for that one.
I think, charity jobs is great. Guardian jobs is pretty good too. I think for me, because I work for a local charity, so if you're looking to work sort of grassroots or local charities, I think every town and city seems to have a voluntary action. So we have Voluntary Action Sheffield. Looking for vacancies in local places is better, because I know as a small charity we can't afford to advertise on charity job or guardian jobs, and even if we could, sometimes you're inundated with like thousands of applicants if you put it out that wide, and we just wouldn't have the time to shortlist from that. So yeah, looking at some more local ones is a really good idea as well.
Yeah. Annie, Russell, anything to add on that in terms of where to look for jobs like yours?
I often look at Environment Job. That's a really good website, that especially if you're trying to find stuff, obviously, in the environment sector. But also, yeah, similarly, I think that actually just looking on the websites of organisations that you're interested in is a good practice. It's a bit more annoying and time consuming to just have to go back and check on the off chance, but I think that's how I saw the job advertised at the Green Party, actually, because I don't think they had the resource at the time to put it in Guardian jobs and that sort of thing. So yeah, if there's like a little dream list of organisations you really want to work for, if there's like a half a dozen or so, I would recommend just checking their website once a week and looking at their vacancies. Yeah.
Okay. Izzy in the chat has written, good moves is great if you're in Scotland. And I know that in Wales you can look at WCVA, the Welsh Council for Voluntary Action. They've got a lot of good jobs. Annie, where did you find your job?
And this one on charity jobs. I think another good way of finding and keeping up to date is to follow organisations on social media, so Facebook or Instagram. They'll often post upcoming jobs. There is a podcast that I listen to called 80,000 Hours. And this one, I'll post it in the chat. He talks about factory farming and how you can use your skills and expertise to get into a job looking into factory farming. So
Munday.
I can post it. There you go.
Thanks. And if you've all mentioned at different points in this chat that like volunteering or like doing the doing, so campaigning, Russell talked about grassroots campaigning, Ellie and Annie both talked about volunteering and different things. Where would people go if they didn't potentially want a job but they wanted to do some other type of action or volunteering with the causes that you work with? Go to Russell.
Good question. So I would say an obvious one for environmental campaigning would be Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace would almost always have fairly active grassroots branches in most towns and cities in the UK. Of course, you could reach out to your local Green Party branch. I would be remiss not to mention. It depends the nature of the campaigning you want to do. I mean, so some things that I've been involved. If you want to do more like direct action stuff, obviously Extinction Rebellion is really good fun, but obviously it might not be for everybody. Similarly, along those lines, I've done stuff with Reclaim the Power, which has been doing stuff that was sort of born out of the climate camps that happened in the late sort of noughties. I don't know if any in the audience would know about them. They basically take direct action against fossil fuel plants. So I broke into a coal mine in South Wales once. That was a good learning experience in many ways. I also do some great stuff with an organisation called BP or Not BP. So they challenge oil sponsorship of the arts. So if you look into an organisation called Art Not Oil, that's an umbrella organisation of a lot of campaign groups that do lots of stuff on that. And there's a real momentum behind that at the moment. So it's a really exciting time to get involved in that. And generally speaking, they are after such an array of skills. Like no matter how comfortable you are doing different aspects of the campaign, you can really get involved very, very quickly. That's been by far my most rewarding campaigning experience of my life. So I definitely recommend doing stuff with doing creative campaigning wherever you can as well.
Yeah, they do some quite like experiential campaigning, don't they? Where you like dress up and reenact stuff, and it's all quite
Yeah, so it started it was founded as a campaign against BP sponsoring the Royal Shakespeare Company, and activists would buy tickets for the performance, and they would just before the curtain would go up, they would jump onto the stage and do a really abridged version of that night's play, but make it about oil and corruption and imperialism and all the rest of it. So that's where it all came from, and now they do stuff in all sorts of spaces, and increasingly ambitious theatrical interventions. Always good fun.
Yeah, super fun, really interesting. I love it when like different sectors collide and that kind of stuff happens. Really interesting. Annie, what about you? If people wanted to volunteer or get involved in campaigning in your industry?
Yeah, there's loads of opportunities. I think often people kind of think animal protection, animal activists, they imagine people like chaining themselves to McDonald's and handing out leaflets and stuff. And whilst there is not the chaining, but there is a little bit of kind of on the ground protesting. We do actually do a lot of online activism as well. So you can, well, if you're interested in a particular organisation like the Humane League or Animal Equality or any of the amazing animal charities that are out there, it's a good kind of way to get into online activism, just to go through their website, and there's often links. And I think Ellie mentioned earlier like an online toolkit that she was preparing. We have things like that where you can follow particular campaigns that we're doing, where you might be able to like email a company and kind of just help with that. And also a lot of volunteers do research projects for us. So we had somebody researching investments into industrial agriculture, and somebody just sort of investigating like corporations and what they're doing, and so yes, plenty of opportunity to get involved even in this situation.
Yeah, really different type of campaigning. Well, it surprised me when I learned about your job, when you said you were a campaigner the first few times we had a conversation about it, and you were like, well, yeah, I just go to lots of meetings. It's a kind of different vision of campaigning to what people have at the front of mind, I think. But there's a different type of campaigning for everybody. And Ellie, you said that you first got into working with Chilypep because you were volunteering with them. Do you think that's the best way in for people wanting to do something like what you do?
I think so, yeah. I think if you want to work sort of sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog, she's going mental.
2 minutes, Ellie.
Contacting local youth campaigning organisations, that's what I did. The thing with that, I would say, with small organisations is don't be disheartened if they don't get back to you quickly or say that they don't have vacancies, because funders are really reluctant to fund volunteer coordinator positions, which is why a lot of small organisations don't have them, which puts you in this catch-22 situation of, we really want volunteers because we really want to be able to support more young people, but we don't have the capacity to support volunteers, which is then just unethical if volunteers aren't well supported and getting something out of it. So yeah, try not to be too disheartened. And then the other thing would, if you're a young person, so UNICEF say that's up to 30, so woohoo, just still a young person.
Oh, I'm just over, so old.
Just start your own campaign. Like, you can do it any which way. Like, it can be small. I mean, you've got young campaigners like Malala Yousafzai, Greta Thunberg, Emma Gonzalez, and the other young people in Florida. Or more locally, our Black Lives Matter protest at the start of June was organised by 4 young people who were all under 20. So like, young people are doing great things, and you don't always need a charitable organisation to help you to do that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, I think we will end that. We've had a couple of people in the comments saying, oh, I'm just a young person, or I'm just over. But even if you're really old like me, you could still do it. It's fine. We will finish up there so that we give 10 minutes in between sessions for everybody to go and get a cup of tea and have a break. I just wanted to end by saying thank you so much, Ellie, Annie and Russell. Thanks so much for joining us on Friday afternoon. I know you're all really busy and you've got lots of other bits and bobs going on in your lives, and dogs and babies and houses to renovate and really busy, important jobs. So super appreciate you being here. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody else by saying thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your evenings and a good weekend ahead. Some time off from your busy jobs. Thank you so much. If anybody wants to carry on the conversation from what we've just been talking about, I'm going to drop a link to the coffee shop in the chat. We'll be over on table 2. So if anybody wants to join table 2, the link is in the comments now. And it's just a different online space that's a bit less formal than this one. Not sure if our panelists can join you in there, but if anybody from the session wants to go and sort of chat and share different ideas about what we've just talked about, that's the place to do it. Make yourself a coffee while you do it, and then you can feel like you're really in a coffee shop. But thank you. Thanks so much.